your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Chapter 11, verses 1 to 4. He was praying in a certain place, and when he had finished, one of his disciples said to him, "Lord, teach us to pray, just as John taught his disciples." He said to them, "When you pray, say, 'Father, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, as we ourselves forgive everyone in debt to us. And do not subject us to the final test." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Please be seated. My dear fathers, brothers, and sisters, the Gospel today is very special. The disciples asking Jesus to teach them to pray. When Jesus prayed, no one disturbed. We are told when Jesus stopped praying, that's when the disciples went to him with the request, "Master, teach us to pray." St. Augustine becomes eloquent while interpreting this passage. St. Augustine says, the disciples have seen wondrous things that Jesus had done before them. Again and again, the Gospels tell us that the disciples were amazed at what Jesus did. The winds and the storms and the waves obeyed Jesus. And they began to ask, "Who is this?" Even the powers of nature obey him. Even the demons obey him. The disciples were wonderstruck at the marvelous things that Jesus did. The way Jesus silenced the Pharisees in argument. But at no such time did the disciples ask Jesus to teach them to do a thing like that. The disciples did not ask Jesus to teach them, "Master, tell us how to raise the hand and the winds obey you." How to do that? What is the magic behind it? Could you teach us that? No, they never asked. Master, you turn the water to wine. What is the trick behind it? No, they did not ask. Master, you silenced the Pharisees and the scribes in argument. What is the clever thing behind it? Oh no, they never asked Jesus any such thing. But when the disciples saw Jesus praying, they asked him, Master, we want to pray as you pray. Teach us how to pray. And St. Augustine is asking why? Because for the disciples, first and foremost, Jesus was a man of prayer. They knew if they could pray as Jesus prayed, that was enough to be a disciple. Everything else would follow. Everything else would follow. My dear fathers, brothers, and sisters, it's good for us to ask ourselves, what a disciple do I want to be? What a disciple do I want to be? First and foremost, if I want to be a disciple of Jesus, I should be a man, a woman of prayer. Everything else would follow. We'll want to be working miracles, doing great things, gathering crowds. That is amazing. But that's not what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. To be a leader, a Christian leader. To be a Christian leader means first and foremost a person of prayer, as Jesus was. Though Jesus did marvelous things, amazing the apostles, Jesus was first and foremost a man of prayer. That is clear the way the disciples wrote the Gospels, as the Gospels present Jesus. When we read the Gospels, we would get a clear impression. Jesus, a man of prayer. Jesus said, my Father and I are one. John chapter 17, verse 21. Jesus always wanted to be one with the Father in prayer. Jesus also said, the words that I say are not mine, but what my Father whispers to me. Jesus waiting to hear the whisper of the Father. Waiting to hear the whisper of the Father. My food is to do the will of my Father. Always waiting in the presence of the Father. St. Mark tells us, Mark 1:35, early morning, Jesus woke up and went to a lonely place to pray. And he prayed for a long time. And the crowds were gathering. waiting for Jesus, and Simon Peter went in search. Where did he go? Simon Peter knew he would be in that place of prayer. Mark 1:36. When I told Jesus, the people are waiting for you. Jesus, a man of prayer. At one time, Jesus said, "It is to my Father that I belong to." Jesus said to the disciples, John 16:32. John 16:32. At a very emotional moment, Last Supper, Jesus said, all of you will leave me, abandon me, but I am not alone. My Father is with me. Our belongingness to the Father that Jesus always counted on. My Father is with me. Our closeness, our belongingness, a oneness that Jesus cherished, that Jesus counted on. My Father and I are one. And all the success that Jesus had in his ministry, Jesus was waiting and longing to share with the Father. Luke chapter 5. Jesus healed a leper in those days. Leprosy was a sickness considered the curse of God. A curse of God that would never be healed. And yet, Jesus healed a leper. And the name and fame became so widespread. People came in search of Jesus from all over. His popularity spread. And immediately the next sentence, Luke chapter 5 verse 16, Jesus did not wait to enjoy all that popularity. Jesus went to a lonely place to pray, to share with the Father all the joy of that success. Father, let your name be glorified, because the poor and the sick and the brokenhearted are experiencing your mercy. But his ministry was not always so successful. He was misunderstood terribly. A man with a withered hand, Jesus healed. Luke chapter 6 verse 12. Luke chapter 6 verse 12. A man with a withered hand in the synagogue. Jesus healed him. Jesus knew he was not permitted to heal on the Sabbath. But this man with a withered hand, what does it mean? A man with a withered hand. A man with a withered future, withered life. He had no future. Jesus decided to give him a life. Jesus healed him. And the Pharisees interpreted it as violation of the Sabbath, rule of Sabbath. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees came together, plotting to kill Jesus. A terrible misunderstanding. Jesus was hurt. And Jesus went to a lonely place to pray, to share with the Father the pain of being misinterpreted, misunderstood. Luke chapter 6, verse 12. We find Jesus eager and waiting to share with the Father every experience, whether success or failure, misunderstanding, every experience with the Father. At the end of a busy day, we find that Mark chapter 6, verse 46, a very busy day. At the end of it, we are told Jesus retired to a lonely place to pray. Usually, being busy could mean barrenness. Busy life is a barren life. Being busy could make us very barren. Nothing is produced. We can be running around, but nothing happens. Jesus went to a lonely place to pray. It is said, Pope John Paul II, he was praying. John Paul II was a shepherd who spent a lot of time in prayer. And when he prayed, the understanding was that no one disturbed him. And his personal assistant, Monsignor Stanislaus, was sitting behind. And that's when the Cardinal Secretary of State came rushing, wanting to meet the Pope to tell him something very urgent. And Monsignor Stanislaus reminded the Cardinal that the Pope did not want to be disturbed. But the Cardinal told the Monsignor, this is a very urgent matter, a matter deserving immediate attention, and I really want to speak to the Pope urgently. And Monsignor Stanislaus went and told the Pope, Your Holiness, Cardinal Secretary of State. As you know, Cardinal Secretary of State is the number 2 in position in Vatican. Cardinal Secretary of State is waiting for you. It's a very urgent international matter. His Eminence, the Cardinal, is waiting to speak to you. And the Pope said, Monsignor, did the Cardinal say it's a very urgent matter? And the Monsignor said, Your Holiness, that's what His Eminence says. It's a very urgent international matter. And the Pope smiled and said, tell the Cardinal, if the matter is so urgent, I need to pray a little more. There are a lot of urgent matters, and we run from pillar to post, and at the end of it all, we make a mess of everything. And that's what I said earlier, a busy life can make us very barren. And Jesus, at the end of a busy day, he spends time in prayer. Again, Jesus spends a whole night in prayer before choosing the disciples, before making a very important decision. Luke chapter 6, verse 12. A whole night in prayer before making a very important decision. Now, what I wanted to tell you is this. The impression that Jesus left in the minds of the disciples was a man of prayer. It's good for us to ask ourselves as leaders, what impression am I leaving in the minds of my followers? Am I a man, a woman of prayer? If I do not leave that impression in the minds of my followers, I have failed in my leadership? Am I leading my followers to Jesus or somewhere else? If I'm leading them to Jesus, I must be leading them in prayer. In prayer. And that's the only way I must be leading. I must be a man, a woman of prayer. If I'm a person of prayer, I will be rooted and grounded in love. I take that phrase from St. Paul, Ephesians chapter 3. Ephesians chapter 3, St. Paul is praying. St. Paul is praying. I'm praying, St. Paul says, that you may be rooted and grounded in love. How are we rooted and grounded in love? A tree growing. As the tree grows up, the roots go deeper and deeper, rooted and grounded in love. Often what happens to leaders is this. Leaders get swayed. And leadership gets partial, very partial. The partiality of leadership can mean disastrous. And this is where there are problems in the church. And the leadership can also become very immature. Haven't you heard leaders saying, I'm not appreciated, I'm not cared for, I'm not respected? Such silly sort of emotional outbursts among leaders. And the leaders get swayed to one person who appreciates the leader, another person who does not appreciate. Too much of emotional partiality among the leaders. Because a leader is not rooted and grounded in the love of Jesus Christ. And this maturity in leadership comes to us when we are rooted and grounded in the love of Jesus Christ. And that becomes possible only when we are men and women of prayer. And Jesus said, we must be really servants and not hirelings. You know, a difference that Jesus makes. The hirelings are people who work for pay. We must understand this in the context of in the time of Jesus. The servants stay in the master's own household. Servant belongs to the household. And the servant stays in the house of the master. He belongs to the master. But then a hireling comes and goes. He's paid every day. And a servant would die for the master. But a hireling works for a pay. And Jesus says, I need servants and not hirelings. We often become hirelings. We reach out for a pay. I'm working for God. I need a pay. What's the pay? I need to be respected. I need to be appreciated, and I need to be paid. We reach out for money or respect, honor, and what else? This is where we all need to be looking very closely into our hearts. What am I working for God for? Am I a hireling? Or am I a servant of God? If I'm a servant of God, I'm not working for a pay. My pay is the honor, glory of God. Glory of God. I work for the glory of God. I'm a servant of God. Since we are not rooted and grounded in the love of Jesus Christ, because we are not men and women of prayer, we are not able to be of service to our people. We want to make a very honest soul search. And we want to ask God's pardon if there is anything lacking in us, as we said in the beginning. Am I truly a servant of God? Or am I a hireling? Am I rooted and grounded in the love of Jesus Christ?